In today's video, we're going to talk about small stakes PLO exploits. What I did is I analyzed millions of hands by small stakes PLO players, and I came to the conclusion that people have a lot of leaks. People are making tons of mistakes, and in today's video, I'm going to share one of those mistakes with all of you. And if you think that sounds interesting, guys, then make sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and also check out PLOmastermind.com if you want to learn more about pot limit OMA. Now, guys, let's get into it. Small stakes PLO exploits. If you are a small stakes PLO player, then you might have noticed that players in your game make a lot of mistakes, and probably yourself as well. Today, I'm going to share one of them with you. To do this, I want to start off by thinking a little bit more big picture before jumping into the specific leak that I found and that I want to share with you on how to exploit that leak. So what is the goal in poker, guys? Is to make the highest EV play every time you have a decision. What does this mean? It means that every hand, every decision that you have the opportunity to make the best decision possible. Now, if you want to make the highest EV decision possible, in my opinion, we should all start out by having a solid baseline strategy. Now, what do I mean by a solid baseline strategy? Let's look at an example to understand what I'm talking about. Let's say we're playing button against big blind single raise pot. The board is ace 9 6 rainbow. The big blind checks to you and you have a decision to make whether to check or bet. Now, I don't want to specifically focus on the hand in question, but I want to think more about the overall strategy of this scenario. Button against big blind, the board is ace 9 6 rainbow. How often would you bet with your entire range on this board? I believe many players will assume that they can bet a lot more frequently than we can actually do. The strategy on this board is that we, on average, should bet around 50% only. So not that often, even though our range is uncapped. But knowing that our range is very wide pre-flop, and even though we have a slight range advantage on this board, we can only bet around 50%. This is an example for me of having a solid baseline strategy. You know, based on your understanding of the game, that on ace-high boards, button against big blind, we're only betting around 50%, sometimes a little bit more. But we're definitely not betting, let's say, 70 or 80 or maybe even 90%. Something that is possible if you look into another scenario. For example, you open raise early position, the big blind calls. Now the same board arrives. In that scenario, you can bet a lot more often. And this is because your range, your pre-flop range, is a lot stronger and connects better with the ace. And therefore, you can allow yourself to bet more frequently. But this is just an example. But what I'm talking about with a solid baseline strategy is that you have a good idea and a good understanding of the most important spots in the game and how to play these scenarios. Like, for example, how often are you betting with your entire range on that board, or who has a range advantage? Once you have this solid baseline strategy, you can adjust from this strategy as an exploit against players who are deviating from a good solid baseline strategy and who are making mistakes. Once you know that baseline strategy, it becomes a lot more easy to adjust and to exploit because you know what is actually a correct baseline strategy. And once you do have that, you can exploit your opponents by identifying the mistakes that they are making. Now, today I want to give you an example based on mass database analysis. Let's look at an example. Button against big blind, single raise pot, and the board is queen 8-6 rainbow. In this situation, in a GTO setting, the big blind is supposed to lead out. He's the first player to act. He's supposed to lead out 20% of the time. And he's going to win 303 big blinds per 100. A 20% leading range is something that a lot of people will not incorporate into their strategy. If they are in the big blind and they have the option to lead out or check, most of the time they will just check with their entire range. So the big blind is checking his entire range. In that scenario, the big blind is winning 300 big blinds per 100. So he's only losing 3 big blinds per 100 by not having to incorporate that leading range. And incorporating a 20% leading range is a challenge, right? It's not that easy to figure out what types of hands do I want to lead, what types of hands do I want to check in order to check call, to check raise, for example. It's very complicated, and therefore implementing a strategy where you only check, I think, is fine, because you only give up 3 big blinds per 100. But let's say, what if the button has a leak when he does face the donk bet? Let's look deeper into that. What I did is I analyzed 8.1 million hands. This is a player pool of regulars at PLO 50. If you look into the sample size, it's 8.1 million hands exactly, and the win rate of these players is 4.9 big blinds per 100. So they have a good win rate. These are players at this stake who know what they're doing and who are winning players at least. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the analysis. I used hand to note to analyze this player pool. And here we're looking at a single raise pot in position scenario where we are the pre-flop raiser. So for example, button against big blind. Now I want you to pay attention to the box at the bottom, which is how the button is responding against the lead out from the big blind. Now what we see here is the response by the in-position player against the donk bet. We see the folding column, the calling column, and the raising column, and the frequencies attached to it. Let's focus on one specifically, and that is if the big blind donk bets for around 70% of the pot, what is the response? In green, we see the response by the population. So how are all these winning players together responding against the donk bet? In yellow, we see the response on average on many boards in a GTO setting. In other words, how would a computer in an optimal environment respond against a donk bet? And we do see that the population is folding 51% against the donk bet, while in theory, we should only fold 34% of the time. We see that the population is calling less often, 43% only, and raising 5.5%. So the big thing that we see here is that the in-position player is heavily overfolding if you compare it at least with a GTO solution. 51% is a heavy overfold against a donk bet. So now we know that the in-position player there is folding too often if the big blind is leading out. Based on data, we figured this out. So the leak here is that in position is overfolding against a donk bet. So what I did next is I created a model and I let the button fold 50% of the time against the big blind lead. What do you think is happening now to the big blind's leading range? Is it gonna be more than 20%? Is it gonna be less than 20%? It's gonna be the same? Well, the answer is that the lead out frequency is going to increase dramatically. 70% of the time, we are now supposed to lead out and exploit the leak that the in-position player is holding, which is he's overfolding against the lead out. Our win rate for this scenario is going to increase to 321 big blinds per 100. So we go from 303 in a GTO setting to 300 in a setting that most players will probably play. And then we can increase that win rate to 321 big blinds by incorporating a leading frequency that is a lot higher than 20%. And that is because the in-position player is heavily overfolding. So if we go back to this sheet here in hand to note, we now learned based on database analysis, based on analyzing millions of hands and stats, that there's a leak in a single raise pot in position by the pre-flop raiser that is overfolding against the donk bet. So I think this is something that might be a bit surprising to many of you, that the leak is that big and that we can take so much advantage of it by donk betting more often. And I highly encourage you guys to start incorporating this into your game. Realize when you're in the big blind that the in-position player is heavily overfolding and that you can lead out way more often than you probably are doing at the moment. I hope that you did find some value in this video. If you do so, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And also stay tuned. What is coming at PLOmastermind.com? Next week is our 7th year anniversary. And we're going to launch a small stakes membership inside the PLO Mastermind for all of you that currently can't afford the full subscription. But for those of you who can't, we're going to launch a $50 per month membership inside the PLO Mastermind. Already, you can create a free account at PLOmastermind.com, so you will be updated when the membership is live, so you can immediately take advantage of it by accessing PLO Trainer in that case, as well as watching some of the videos inside the PLO Mastermind.